I think current practices, most of the time, if you think about farmers, they try to do the best they can do to protect their soil. I mean, that's really it is. They do not want to do things to harm their soil.
Something to Chew On is a podcast devoted to the exploration and discussion of global food systems. It's produced by the Office of Research Development at Kansas State University. I'm Maureen Olevnik, Coordinator of Global Food Systems.
I'm Scott Denona. I'm a philosopher of science.
And I'm John Fabian. I'm a food scientist.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. The food we eat is a product of many factors, including seed quality and variety, weather conditions during the growing season, and processing and storage. But one of the most critical aspects of growing food is what it is grown in, the soil. Soil provides nutrients to the growing plants through its components, which include minerals, water, organic matter, and microorganisms. Additionally, soil provides a critical avenue for carbon dioxide sequestration, a major factor in reducing greenhouse gas. In this podcast, we will be talking with Dr. Ganga Hettiarachchi, professor in the Department of Agronomy in Kansas State University's College of Agriculture. Ganga is one of the world's leading scientists in the fields of trace metal and nutrient chemistry in soils. Her research at K-State focuses on understanding the chemistry of both nutrient and contaminant elements in soils, with the goal of developing solutions to agricultural or environmental problems.
I'd like to welcome you, Ganga, to Something to Chew On, and look forward to hearing more about you personally and about your profession.
Thank you for inviting me. So I was born and raised in the suburb of Colombo, Sri Lanka. And then when I was about to go to university, I had opportunity either to go and do agriculture science or go and do biosciences. And my mom was leaning towards biosciences because that means that I could go to university from home, because it was the best university for that was in Colombo. And then the agricultural sciences, it was in a different city. My dad thought that doing agricultural sciences, more like applied sciences, would be beneficial. So he encouraged me to actually take opportunity, although it was in a different city, and go and do that. And then while I was doing my bachelor's, third year, we get an opportunity so we do all sort of agriculture courses, starting from agricultural engineering, agricultural economics, to soil science, food science, animal science, everything, pretty much. And then third year, we get a chance to select what area we want to specialize in. And then final year, fourth year, we do only that. And then we have 6 months research project as a bachelor student doing like a honors degree, BSc honors degree. So I chose soil science. I could have gone and do some other things, but because the job prospect for soil science wasn't that great at that time in Sri Lanka. But because my desire for soil science, I stick with that, and I did my specialization in soil science, and I did a project related to phosphorus chemistry for my final year. And then I got an opportunity to come to U.S. on a Fulbright scholarship to do my master's. And I came to Kansas State University and did my master's and stayed at Kansas State University. Same professor, Dr. Gary Piersinski, and did my PhD in soil chemistry as well. Only difference was when I was doing my master's, I did again phosphorus chemistry, but I changed my focus and did more like environmental chemistry, focusing on contaminants and how to handle soil contamination, remediation focus, more specifically in situ stabilization of soil lead, cadmium, and zinc. And then I did a postdoctoral fellowship at USCPA National Risk Management Laboratory at Cincinnati, Ohio. And I went back to my university because I was actually, when I was doing my master's and PhD, I was on study leave as an assistant lecturer at the same university. I did my bachelor's. So I went back and worked as a senior lecturer over there for 2 years and took a position as a research scientist in Adelaide, Australia. So I was at the University of Adelaide and the CSIRO, Commonwealth Science and Industrial Research Organization, for 3 years before came on to this position. So I actually replaced, since Dr. Piersinski decided to go to administration, I was the replacement for his position.
So you shifted when you started your master's, you shifted into more of the environmental side and looking at the chemistry of environmental contaminants. What led to that shift?
How was it? Actually, it's the same principles. A lot of people ask me that because I focus on soil contamination remediation, that thing for my PhD. And then when I was in Australia, I was again working on nutrient chemistry, phosphorus and micronutrients. It's same principle. The only thing is when it comes to nutrients, as a soil chemist, I try to find ways I can maximize nutrient availability to plants and synchronize nutrient availability with plant uptake. For contaminants, it's again understanding chemistry of that and then trying to minimize the bioavailability of it. For example, when I was doing my PhD, I was looking at zinc in southeast Kansas and the tri-state mining area, where zinc was an issue. Zinc concentration was too high, so that zinc was causing phytotoxicity. We cannot get any plants to grow in those mine-waste materials. So I was trying to see how we can minimize zinc bioavailability so that we can get grass growing and with growing grass, minimize contaminated material moving by wind and water. And then when I was in South Australia, I was looking at zinc as a nutrient because in most South Australia has a lot of high pH, high calcareous soil, so zinc is not available for plant to take up. Most crops are suffering from zinc deficiency. So I was looking at zinc over there to maximize zinc bioavailability. So I think it's same principle, same understanding, just looking at, depending on situation, looking at either to increase bioavailability or decrease bioavailability.
Interesting.
And the results of your research get promulgated out through, by what way? How do they actually reach the people that might benefit by it?
Yeah, so various ways. So when we were dealing with, so the first project after I moved to K-State as a faculty member, it was funded by USCPA, and that's to looking at urban gardening, sustainable gardening at brownfield sites. So brownfields are actually sometimes not necessarily contaminated, maybe mildly contaminated, but because of perceived contamination, it's abandoned or underutilized. So looking at those kind of soils and then how to get those to put into urban gardening or some other use. So in that project, we actually directly dealt with communities. We chose the brownfield site to establish our test plots, working with communities. So we had that direct community involvement. as well as the part of it was it's a research technical assistance kind of a program. So we needed to work with communities. We made a lot of the fact sheets for people to use, as well as we did a lot of workshops, different places. So through workshops and things like that, when I was in South Australia working on micronutrient and ways to enhance micronutrient availability, we use again journals that the magazines actually goes to farmers. So I remember when I receiving sometimes directly phone calls from farmers, actually just before they are deciding to apply fertilizer, asking me why I think that liquid would work better for their soils compared to granules. And I had that similar experience over here after one of my PhD students, like most recent paper, JV, if you all know him. And then I got an email from a farmer in Nebraska asking about, again, the same type of questions. So I think sometimes it reached, again, that wasn't like that was published in, the recent paper was published in Soil Science Society of America Journal. That's not what actually reached the farmer. Based on that, KSRE did a kind of interview. I think that was what alerted farmers. So I think we should not think that publishing in, although that is our goal, professional goal to publish in peer-reviewed journals, but at the same time we do need to do those kind of interviews, those kind of workshops and things like that, so that information will get to farmers or gardeners or the end users.
I was just going to ask, you were talking about the brownfields and identifying contaminants in inner cities and those types of things. Did you get to the point to where you were working with actually cleaning those up? How does that happen? How do you clean up an area once it's contaminated that way?
So when we were doing brownfields work, we were supposed to actually not just go to any brownfields. The EPA grant required us to actually go to brownfields where communities intend to have decided to convert that to or transform that into an urban garden or a community garden. So we work with those communities. So first thing when we were doing that process, since we cannot actually test everything under the sun, so we do some kind of history information, trying to gather history information using sandbone map, talking to neighbors, talking to community, and then trying to kind of narrow down what things need to be tested. And we had 7 sites within that project. And first site was in Kansas City, Missouri. And then the second site was Tacoma, Washington, Seattle, Washington. And then site was Indianapolis, Indiana. One was Pomona, California. And then we had a site in Philly as well. So all those places, after talking to them, we sometimes we only tested for inorganic contaminants because we found that the most common contaminants, contaminants in those urban brownfields, that's lead. Sometimes it was lead and arsenic. Sometimes it was, we thought that cadmium is also another common contaminant, but we did not find a site contaminated with all three. And Indianapolis site, we found, in addition to lead, arsenic, we found polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon concentration to be elevated as well. So depending on site, what we found were different. And then if it is organic contaminant, Maureen, then we try to see what are the ways to degrade that, enhance degradation of that. But with inorganic contaminants, we were not trying to remove them. They are not degrading. Most of these inorganic contaminants are persistent. Only thing we can do is we can look at ways to transform those into less mobile form or less bioavailable form. So use soil amendments and use our understanding about that particular chemical and that particular soil and try best way to keep it in place so that it will not move from soil to plant. And in any way, something like lead is not something easily moving from soil to plant. Even if it moves, it actually stays in roots rather than moving from root to shoot. So the understanding how they behave in soil and how they behave in plants, like the uptake and all that, we can decide what's the best approach.
And do you set, when you go into a site, do you set specific thresholds that you would consider these as sites that ought to be remediated, or how are those set?
So how that works, so we do know that when soil lead concentration, so if you look at EPA, the residential soil lead limit is 400 milligrams per kilogram. Mm-hmm. But that was determined or decided based on 10 micrograms per deciliter of children blood lead concentration. Mm-hmm. In 2012, the CDC had a group of scientists looking at all the health scientists looking at all the effects of blood lead on children's health. And their recommendation was that no blood level is safe for children. Since CDC cannot go for, going for 0 micrograms per deciliter is not practical. So they went with this 95th percentile, which was 5 micrograms per deciliter limit. And currently CDC is considering to actually bring it down further to 3 micrograms per deciliter or so. So after CDC did this change from 10 to 5, actually, EPA did not do any kind of change to the residential soil lead limit. But we all know that based on to whom we talk to, we know that this concentration of soil lead could be 150, 200. But again, as a soil scientist, I know that what really matters is not the total concentration. You could have even 400 row soil with 400 row higher soil lead, but if it is not bioavailable, then it might be safer than a soil with 150 milligrams per kilogram of lead, but the lead is bioavailable. So I think that what we use is not the total concentration. We look at total concentration because that's what mostly people want to know. But at the same time, we make decisions based on bioaccessibility. Because bioaccessibility is, we do have tests, proven tests with animal feeding studies that we can mimic gastrointestinal dissolution of soil lead and then determine what's the amount of lead that can be the maximum amount of lead that can be bioaccessible to a human child or an adult human if they accidentally ingest that soil. So our decisions we made based on both.
And are these treatments, remediation treatments that you would apply to the soil, are they, if this were to roll down to the level of the producer, would it be the gardener or the farmer or the land owner or tiller, would they be the ones that would be having the responsibility of doing these treatments?
Yeah, so yes. And then most of the time, these soil amendments, as it sounds, are things that farmers or gardeners use. For example, when it comes to lead, it is phosphorus. So all of us use phosphorus as a fertilizer and fertilize our gardens, lawns and everything with phosphorus. So the reason phosphorus is the most effective treatment to reduce lead bioaccessibility, phosphorus can induce formation of lead phosphate and specific group of lead phosphate known as pyromophite, and that has very little solubility, even if it is subject to very acidic stomach conditions. So phosphorus, or either depending on soil properties, we may not be directly recommending to use straight fertilizer. It may be that the organic source of phosphorus that's slowly releasing phosphorus and maintaining phosphorus in a high enough level to promote these kind of transformation and reduce bioaccessibility of land. Because you know that phosphorus has two sides. So these kind of benefits are there. It's a fertilizer, plants need to complete their life cycle. So we need to maintain good phosphorus levels. But at the same time, the phosphorus, nitrogen ending up in surface water can cause eutrophication. Considering all that, some of those sites, if we find that the extractable levels of phosphorus is already high, then what we recommended could be slow releasing pea source, mostly like organic, like compost based.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you. Very completely.
I know that you had mentioned Dr. Jay Weeks a little bit earlier, and I've visited with him in the past. Actually, he was one of our hosts for a period of time. And we talked a lot about sequestration of CO2. And with the global warming and everything we know about CO2 in the atmosphere, can you tell us a bit about how that system works? And is that something that you're working on as well?
Yeah, I work on it, and before I had a PhD student actually working on entirely that for her PhD. And then if you look at why we are interested in soil carbon sequestration, and so it depends on where we looked at what's the carbon dioxide concentration in atmosphere and what's the carbon dioxide concentration and carbon concentration in and organic carbon specifically in the top 1 meter of soil. And then you see that the top 1 meter of soil contains organic carbon 2 to 3 times higher than what we have in the atmosphere. And then although we know that the geologic carbon source can be much high, and then the other marine and other environment carbon can be high, but if you consider why we consider as soil carbon sequestration as a mitigation effort, the soil is in direct contact with the atmosphere. So soil can be a single source for carbon. So you know that the soil can be a sink through the photosynthesis, and photosynthesis process is using carbon dioxide and water when sunlight is there to convert inorganic carbon to organic carbon. And then this organic carbon gets into soil, and then the part of it can decompose and release carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. And at the same time, there can be ways this carbon, the organic carbon actually going to be part of what we consider as soil organic carbon or the humus, and then finding ways to keep this carbon in soil longer we call as carbon sequestration. So I was interested in, I'm always interested in understanding basic, mechanisms. My whole research interest is understanding mechanisms of any processes that I'm interested in. So we were interested in looking at the temperate soils like molly soils that was Dr. Chuck Rice's long-term field study. It's actually close to 30 years now. And at the time we sampled it was over 23 years. And it was under continuous cone. And they had these treatments, different levels of nitrogen fertilizer and also 2 different sources of nitrogen fertilizers. And then looking at the carbon sequestration mechanisms, like how carbon getting sequestered, how soil mineralogy can impact that sequestration. And then also we compared that system with a long-term field study about that long more than 22 years long study from Brazil as well, because soil types are different. So North Farm soil, that was a molly soil, and then we consider those soils are relatively younger. And then when we consider the Brazil, that soil was an oxy soil, and that was highly weathered and high in iron, aluminum, and manganese oxyhydroxide. So there are mechanisms, when we look at carbon sequestration mechanisms, you could see that more influence from mineralogy. And it doesn't mean that when you go to molecular levels and looking at that level, even in molly soils, there wasn't their contribution from mineralogy. So initial contribution from mineralogy was evident in both systems. Again, you know that we have, all of us as researchers, we have interest. And then sometimes, depending on funding, we move from one to another. So at the moment, I do not have active projects that looking at carbon sequestration, but I am always interested in that aspect of it. The potential of soil to be soil carbon sequestration to be a mitigation effort for climate change.
Is this something that takes a little bit of doing to get farmers to buy into the idea of changing their methods to help enhance CO2 sequestration? Is it something where they're going to have to change what they're doing, or are there current practices that will work well into that?
I think current practices, most of the time, if you think about farmers, they try to do the best they can do to protect their soil. I mean, that's really it is. They do not want to do things to harm their soils. So those studies I mentioned, one in North Farm and the one in Brazil, actually both had tilled and no-till system that we compared. So you know that no-till or reduced till is something that farmers moving towards. Most farmers, it's hard for us to find fields sometimes that continuously till. So the no-till practices, adding the residue back into soil, use cover crops, and all sort of those things that giving opportunities for farmers to increase soil carbon levels. Increase as well as not just increase temporary, but maintaining good soil carbon levels. That's something farmers actually willing to do, I think. Not just, having incentives, but having incentives definitely will help. But you can see the incentive. I actually read a recent article related to getting prairies to enhance carbon sequestration in Texas, and they were talking about how that can work, how the farmers to keep those things, or how people to maintain those kind of natural areas as is, could work out, because the power company they are looking for ways to get carbon credits. So maybe they can work with people who are maintaining prairies and contributing to this carbon sequestration, retaining carbon, so they can work together. So there can be not just government incentives, there can be like private entities that are willing to work with and do this kind of trading, carbon trading. So those kind of things could work. I think the farmers, why they would consider doing this, because they know that if they can maintain good organic carbon concentration in soil, that would enhance microbial activity. So that is promoting nutrient cycling. And then promoting nutrient cycling meaning that the amount of fertilizer input are going to be reduced over time. So there are a lot of positive things that farmers going to gain by doing it. And then this carbon sequestration is actually part of soil aggregation as well. So if you improve soil aggregation, So then that will improve a lot of other physical properties as well. So the air and water movement in soil. So I think it's a win-win situation for farmers. It's something that's going to improve their soils and improve their soil productivity in the long run.
Are there parts of the world that have a greater need for this kind of approach than others? We talk about the southeastern part of Kansas, but if we look globally, are there areas that? Yeah,
I think if we look at like Africa and there are soils like very deficient in carbon. And then they may not have that many sources, but they could consider the conservation type of agriculture management practices to preserve carbon in soil and enhance carbon in soils. So yes, the highly weathered soils and then the drier areas, the arid and semi-arid climate, you find less carbon in soil. So that will be more beneficial, even more beneficial for those farmers to do those kind of practices.
So I was wondering, back to thinking about contaminants, I was wondering, and you were talking about processes to do to make inorganics less bioavailable. I was wondering if there are things that people do to their soil that actually do the reverse, that make things worse. That set up mechanisms that actually make those inorganics uptake into the crops more than they would have otherwise.
Yeah, so we sometimes do it intentionally. So we call it phytoextraction. That's a method of phytoremediation. Phytoremediation is in general meaning like using plants to remediate soil, sediments, or water. Sometimes we intentionally try to use plants to remove contaminants from soil. It does work for some contaminants, but not for highly immobile contaminants like lead. So for something like lead, it's more effective to try to in situ stabilize it rather than trying to extract it. So the attempt to enhance lead uptake by adding EDTA, so that's a chelating the enhanced lead solubility via chelation and getting plants to take up. But no matter what, since plants are not taking lead that much, what happens when you add something like that to enhance the phytoextraction, you would put that, that lead can be subject to maybe moving downward or moving elsewhere. So that could be a problematic. So that's why we do need to understand how we can deal with each of these contaminants under each of those situations. Like what's the best way to handle it? But something like arsenic, for example, there are a group of plants we call as like hyperaccumulators. That means they can accumulate these contaminants higher than normal plants would do. And then, so those kind of hyperaccumulators would allow us to do that cleanup, like use plants and grow plants for some time to do the cleanup. But unfortunately, that doesn't work that well for most trace element contaminants. Most trace elements are absorbed to soil colloids very strongly, so their uptake is very low. And then even if you find a hyperaccumulator, you know that the removal is going to be dependent on not only how much they can accumulate in their plants, but also the biomass. So most hyperaccumulators, although they are hyperaccumulators, meaning that they can have like a high concentration in their tissue, but they are not really a large biomass producers. So if you do calculations, it can take long time to do the cleanup. It may take 20, 30 or more years to do the cleanup. But still, if you want to do that kind of cleanup, so that would be the situation where we try to do enhance availability so that plants will take up. And to your question, if you ask, like, can we make it more bioavailable so it end up in food crops or something, which we do not want, it can happen if we do it without understanding that particular soil, I think. It can happen if we try to just do it without understanding the situation of soil. I can give you an example. If you look at arsenic, arsenic is something that we are very much concerned about. And you see that people talking about some arsenic in apple juice or some arsenic in apples or arsenic in rice and things like that. And then one thing I want to tell you that arsenic, lead, and all other potentially toxic trace elements, they are naturally present in soil. So there's nothing called like positive, lead positive, or arsenic positive or negative. Because it's everywhere in various, the concentrations that are not harmful to us in most cases. And then it's in the air we breathe. Again, what matters is the concentration. Is it above the concentration that's going to harm us? So if it is not higher than that, then we are not concerned. So same thing in water. In water, you find these potentially toxic trace elements in very small quantities. So concentration. So we are concerned if it is above the drinking water or that water quality standard. So if you take arsenic is less bioavailable under oxic conditions. So that means like the urban gardening or the corn or wheat or any kind of gardening we do, well-aerated soil, is immobile. Because arsenic, under that condition, arsenic is going to stay as arsenic 5. And we do know that arsenic 5 species do retain by soil colloids, and then thereby they are not bioavailable. But if you consider rice paddy, and that is grown, and then soils are underwater. So when soils are underwater, then there's less oxygen going in, and then the whatever the oxygen left can be consumed by microorganisms, and then soon, after about 10-14 days after the submergence, soil becoming like suboxic to anoxic. Under that suboxic to anoxic environment, the absorb arsenic, because iron is a good scavenger. Iron oxide is a good scavenger for arsenic. So the iron oxide and hydroxide can undergo reductive dissolution. The dissolution actually induced by reduction of iron, so that these arsenic can release. And then arsenic also, this released arsenic in 5 form can reduce into arsenic 3. And then the arsenic 3 retention to soil colloids is less than the arsenic 5. And even if it retains, it's not actually retained via stronger mechanisms. So they can become easily more bioavailable. And then under suboxic conditions, the arsenic availability can be high. But when again soil turn into anoxic conditions, more or less no oxygen, under that conditions, arsenic can get some arsenic can get sequestered into sulfides and become less available. So I think we do need to understand what's the situations we are dealing with, and then understand the chemistry of soil, understand the behavior of that particular contaminants or organic or inorganic contaminants of interest, and then think through that how we can better manage it.
When you've got a contaminated soil, and you talked about a few ways of mitigating some of that contaminant being taken up into the plant, do you have, when the soil is taken care of and you're mulching it, you're adding composted soil on top of that and working it in, do you have a dilution effect over time there that will help mitigate just total quantities of material that's in there
thank you for bringing that up, Maureen. That's something I forgot to mention before. So the think about why we sometimes go with those organic sources other than direct fertilizers. If you think about compost or any other organic source, we add in high quantities. So sometimes like 1/3 or 1/4 by volume to upper 15 centimeter soil or so, and then mix it well. So the immediate benefit that farmers get from that kind of application is the dilution effect. Sometimes dilution effect can be very high, depending on the amount you mix, and it can be 30-40% of dilution when you do it that way. So, and then maintaining that, not by adding every year, but adding it maybe once in every 3 years, so farmers can maintain that dilution effect. So yes, the adding high quantities of organic matter that would be the immediate benefit that farmers going to get. And then the transforming into less bioavailable forms sometimes take time. And if it is soluble P we are adding, we know that it can be it's relatively fast, but again, it depends on soil lead availability, because lead is not available for plant to take up. Could be that lead is not available for phosphorus to react either. So because of that reason, those reactions can take time, but the immediate benefit of adding something like organic matter would be dilution.
Wow, as John said, this is a very, very complicated topic, but it's probably as critical to our food supply as any. If the soil quality is not there, the crops are not going to grow appropriatly, and so that's just a fascinating area.
If you look at, so we were originally going with FAO, WHO standard, those codex limits for lead concentration in any type of vegetables, but FDA started looking at those by themselves. But at the same time, sometimes you see that these initial numbers coming out of, scientifically, there's no base, unfortunately. Those could be completely decided by like toxicology standpoint. And some of you are food scientists, so you know that everything in food is not bioavailable. So we have to kind of consider that as well, especially when you are developing these type of standards. So that's a complete subject area that we can talk. So
that is another complete subject area, and yeah, many times regulations are set not necessarily based on the science that's needed to set them behind it.
Yes,
absolutely.
Very intense learning situation for me. Certainly, I was probably one of those people that thought that soil was just something that held the plants, physically. So
I've learned with soil scientists, you do not call it dirt.
True.
Do not call it.
Yeah. So I was going to say that soil is very important for environmental quality. So one of the courses I'm teaching environmental quality. So something that I tell my students, this course you can expect to learn about environmental quality from a perspective of a soil scientist. So how soil can, how much we rely on soil, not only to like grow plants and, provide that way, but, and then sometimes our objectives could be like holding a building or something completely different. But at the same time, a lot of, if we look at like waste recycling, we expect soil to do a lot of things. Filter contaminants, degrade contaminants, and protect our groundwater, and then protect our surface waters, and then with carbon mitigation and other efforts, and then help with global climate change. I think there's lots that soil can do.
It's a much more dynamic system than people appreciate.
Yeah, speaks nicely to the global food systems approach towards interdisciplinary research.
Right.
It touches on so many things, and there's so many areas that that work into it.
If you have any questions or comments you would like to share, check out our website at ksu.edu/research/global food and drop us an email. Our music was adapted from Wayne Gowen's album, Chronicles of Carmela. Special thanks to him for providing that to us. Something to Chew On is produced by the Office of Research Development at Kansas State University.